in Darkness that's, in my opinion, 100 times better than the Orbital Perspective, because it goes deeper into that unity, way, way, way deep. So the subtitle, it's Floating in Darkness, A Journey of Evolution, but really it should be Floating in Darkness, A Spiritual Journey of Evolution.
Hallelujah.
So it talks about our spiritual journey in it. I think you'll really like it. So is this audio only, or are you going to use video and audio?
Your video. I can see you. This is
no. I mean,
I just pressed the record button now. I've just pressed the record button now. But obviously, I'm gonna edit it. And what I like you to do is I want you to go back. I think I sent you just a quick outline, but I want you to go from Yonkers to here, because Yonkers is the hometown, right?
Yeah.
So
you're in Hoboken, you said?
I'm in Newark.
Newark. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm in like a high rise in Newark, but directly east, I can see everywhere from the World Trade Center up into Westchester.
Yeah.
In the Bronx, from the top of from the point I am right now. So look, Mr. Garan, what do you want me to call you when Ron? Ron, got you. Ron, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to connect. Pleasure to have you on this platform. For everybody,
we've already met though, Press.
Yeah, exactly, right. But for the rest of the world, for everybody that's gonna see this, they don't know. It's such a blessing. Yeah. I actually met this guy at a lunch at the United Nations during the Gittiman Wealth Impact Conference last year, and we were a couple seats away, so I didn't really get to talk in depth. But at the end of the night, Ron was speaking, and you gave the keynote speech, I believe, and you gave a presentation about your perspective. And I can even remember, funny how the world works. I can remember Jeff Gitterman saying that he needed to get a picture with you because that's the only thing that his kids will find cool out of that event. And fast forward, how the world really works, and maybe you can get into how the cosmos really works. My mom was a labor organizer in New Jersey, in a public employee as a nurse, and one of her peers, I was connecting with one of her peers who's a public policy director for a union that advocates for around 12,000 essential workers in the healthcare and in the teaching space. And after that lunch, she dropped me off at the train station in Edison, Metuchen, New Jersey. And as I'm waiting to get on the train, I say out loud, where is this young lady? And I'm referencing Galen, who actually is from Yonkers and was 8 months pregnant. Was she 8 months pregnant at the time with my daughter, Graceland, who you autographed this book for and dedicated the book for. And I'm happy to tell you, at the time we didn't have a name, so you just put Miss Anderson, but her name is actually Graceland Trinity Michelle. So fast forward, I'm like, where are these young ladies at? Out loud on the train. Kid next to me is like, that's a great question. And we start talking. He's like, my dad runs a wealth management firm. I'm like, hey, are you Jeff Gitterman's son? He's like, yeah, nice to meet you. And we start talking, and he encourages me to reach back out to everybody. He's like, I'm glad that you connected with my family, with the family business. And I think that we can all do a lot together. So I say that to say that I truly believe that when you're aligned and when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, generations in the universe will conspire to propel you forward in that path. And I would love for you to take everybody back to Yonkers before you became one of the most critically acclaimed humans in the history of the American space program. Tell us about your beginning, your origin story.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I agree with the end point that you described, but talk about the beginning. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Yonkers, New York, which I think you could probably see out the window right now.
Exactly.
And it was back in the 60s and 70s, basically. I was born in 61, and back then it was kind of a tough place to grow up. I mean, the whole New York area was a tough place to grow up back in the 70s, especially. And what's interesting about that is, I started to gravitate towards us versus them mentalities. You know what I mean? That there's us, and then there's people that are not us, and those are people to be feared. Those are people to be competitive with, et cetera, et cetera. And that came out in sports. I was a boxer as a kid. Fought on the amateur circuit around New York, and that was one of the reasons why I started doing that, is to be able to protect myself. So, I didn't want to be on the end of a ego destroying left hook. So I did that, and then a more violent sport caught my attention, football. And so that, I think, was kind of a primitive archetype to, I don't know if tribalism is the right word, but into an us versus them attitude, that and the camaraderie. There's pluses and minuses to a tribal attitude, right? The plus is the camaraderie that's built, and for lack of a better word, the love that's built amongst your team, amongst your colleagues, and that transitioned into a squadron environment when I entered the military, and that was taken to its fruition in combat. And so, I flew in Desert Storm. I flew combat missions in Desert Storm, and and it was, I think. So I'm writing this book right now. It's about to be published. It's called Flowing in Darkness, and one of the epiphanies that I talk about in the book is that, I thought my entire life my calling was to become an astronaut, and it was. Right. But my true calling, which only was sparked through the crucible of combat, was the mission to have an ever-expanding tribe, and to have the unity of an ever-expanding tribe be the guiding force of my life, to the point where going to space made me realize that tribe encompasses the entire Earth, and it's called Earthlings. And we have complementary tribes of the animals and the other living things that we all have to integrate with. And so it took, and the foundation of that expanding awareness is awe and wonder and love. And what's interesting is it took the crucible of combat and the violence of combat for that to be sparked in me. I didn't realize it was at the time an unrecognized calling, and I didn't really recognize it till months ago. That when I traced back in the process of writing this book, which I've written actively for over the last 4 years, but now it's in the final stages. Just in those final stages, it dawned on me that was the spark that sent me on the path that led me to where I'm at.
Wow. You know what? That's interesting. The word that pops in my mind is confrontation, right? And when I hear about, first off, your background, right? So me growing up, similarly, I think I felt about hip hop and pursuing a career as a hip hop artist, maybe in a way that you thought about, being an astronaut, though I am nowhere near 71 million miles, I believe, or whatever the hip hop equivalent to that is. But in my world, I think hip hop was my boxing and football, right? So in New Jersey, especially, Newark is home to a huge battle rap culture. And growing up, for those of us, me, I realized, like, I tried all those things, those different sports. I don't want to hit my head too much, but what God gave me a gift with is words and communicating. So I grew up literally boxing people with my words, and the battle rap culture, and so focused on pursuing my career in hip hop when I was in high school. By the time I went to college, when I went to Harvard, I was already like a teen rap star in my own immediate circle in different siloed environments, because I had built up that confidence confronting everybody with my words and learning how to make my competitive advantage, because I didn't necessarily want to be fighting 10,000 people to make a name for myself physically with my hands, but letting words kind of do that for me. And it's funny that you mentioned the other aspects of where space is taking you in your journey in a military, because I also, like you, not necessarily that I'm confined by national borders, but I really do believe in this concept of service and the concept of making this country and this planet something that I don't even think our minds can really even hold it. We don't know. Tomorrow could be 1,000 times bigger than be 1,000 times bigger than today. So I appreciate your perspective and those lessons for the military. Can you tell us? I'm sure every kid like me grew up wanting to go to space camp, right? And like having
Yeah.
the space camp brochures and thinking that that was the greatest thing in the world. And I'm so corny and obsessed with it. Shout out to my cousin Muchiga Cooper when she was she's in Florida now, but when she was in Pasadena with JPL, I'm sitting reading the books, reading the brochures, quizzing her, all her friends, trying to understand, watching her on how the universe works with Dr. Tyson, just getting so engrossed on it. But you actually did it. So what did it take to prepare to leave Earth as we know it, and how did you make that happen?
Yeah. So I think it took about how many years? I don't know how many decades, but from the time I set out to be an astronaut, it was decades before I was selected to train as an astronaut. And then I was selected in the year 2000, and my first flight wasn't until 2008. So I spent 8 years training for my first space flight, basically. So it's not exactly that, but I spent about a year and a half in what we call ASCAN training, astronaut candidate training. And after that year and a half, you are basically designated as an astronaut. You've graduated, right? And then you get assigned to technical jobs, and you train for specific things. So like for specialties like spacewalking or rendezvous and docking with the space station, or all of these different specialties, and you train for those specialties for years. In our case, my classmates in my case, 2003 was Space Shuttle Columbia, so the disaster of Space Shuttle Columbia. And so we stood down for 3 years. So 3 of those 8 years were because we were trying to do the mishap investigation and the return to flight effort, and to figure out how we could stop that from happening again. But once I got assigned to a space flight, my first space flight was a mission called STS-124, which was designed, the mission objective was to bring up and install the Japanese laboratory onto the space station, which is the biggest part of the space station.
Pardon me, what chapter is that in the book? I know you got a new book out, but for those who haven't read this one, what chapter was that?
I think the chapter is called Kibo, Hope for Tomorrow, because the name of the laboratory is Kibo in Japanese, which means hope in English. So that's why it's Kibo, Hope for Tomorrow.
Yeah, I remember that story. We'll follow up. I'll put that in the notes, but I remember that story from the orbital perspective.
Yeah. So I was assigned to that mission, and then I trained specifically for that mission for a year. And then after that mission, I flew with the Russians, actually, and flew on a Soyuz spacecraft and spent 6 months in space on the space station.
So what you just told me is beautiful, because I can remember sitting at Kipriani a couple years ago with an investor that inspired me a lot, actually, from another coach, another Ron, actually, funny or not. And he told me, he said, you just got to wrap your mind around that. It's going to take 10 years. Like it takes 10 years. For you to get what you want and to build this company, to build this brand, it takes 10 years. This is
hard work
around that. So what you told me, you got the call in 2000, but you didn't press the button until 2008. So in your case, that 8 to 10 years, it was a real thing for you. It didn't happen overnight.
No, but you got to back up about 30 years. So, right. Because that was, the really hard part was getting to that phone call. That was the really hard part. And it was somewhat of an impossible journey. It was an unlikely journey. So I had to set out on a road knowing that in almost all certainty, I would not be successful. And what I'm talking about is being selected to begin astronaut training.
Right.
It was such a long shot, and there were so many miracles that had to happen along the way for that to happen. But the reason why I set out on that is I imagined myself in, my twilight years when I was, towards the end of my life, looking back on my life and wondering what would have happened if I gave my all to my dream to become an astronaut. And, I saw that old man as being resentful because I never tried. I never gave it my all. If I had never given it my all, I would turn into that resentful man, and I didn't want to be that old man. So I set out knowing that I probably wouldn't be successful, but I'd be able to look back later in life and realize that I really did give it my all. It was outside of my control that I wasn't successful, but I gave it my all. if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I can remember someone in 2009 working in investment banking at Credit Suisse, and several conversations relevant to this. But I remember looking in the mirror, and at the time I was a year out of school. You got a good job, everybody's likes you. I'm throwing parties. It's like people want to be around you, so to speak. And I'm just like, this ain't it. I'm not proud of myself. I don't like how I look in the mirror. Like, even if this point may be the farthest that somebody in my family has aspired to, or like, this ain't it. Like, I don't want to wake up. I said to myself, I don't want to wake up rich, but not having done what I was supposed to do. Right. And so I agree. I feel everything you talked about. But the second point, and what I want to get into, because you hit on something so real in the beginning, brother, that people are so scared to say, that tribalism mentality, right? And that's why I've been, vigorously pursue connecting with you as well. I think that people are afraid, ashamed, and embarrassed, and rightfully so, that we all bought into BS, quite frankly, and that us against them. And you have a litany of different endeavors and experience that speak to demystifying that us against them. And one of the things I wanted you to get into a little bit was that Russia experience, because in the book, you talk about how, your book, you talking about being in Russia when war is breaking out, and just the level of distrust mutually between Americans and Russians, and the language barrier. But how did you really mitigate that at a time where American and Russian relations was cold?
Yeah. So I think the secret to better relations, whether it's international relations or relations within community, is to look for the low-hanging fruit. Look for the things that we agree on. In the case of Russia and the United States and the International Space Station program, that was space exploration. And when we were getting ready to start a partnership with the Russians, there were all kinds of people that were saying there's absolutely no way that we should do that. They had this whole list of things that they disagreed with Russia on, and that until they stop doing this, and this, we shouldn't have anything to do with them. But we didn't do that. We went ahead and we did the partnership. So what we did is instead of focusing on the differences that we have, we focused on something that we had in common: space exploration. And because we did that, what happened was personal relationships started to develop, a platform of trust started to develop, and that now becomes a platform that, if we choose to, we can use to address the things that we don't agree on. But what we normally do, what is our standard operating procedure, is we take the things that we don't agree on and we use that as a stick to force the things that we don't agree on. And that just absolutely does not work. And so what we need to realize is that there is so much more that we have in common than what separates us. And that, going to space made that perfectly clear. All of that just blurs all of those perceived artificial, self-made separations and differences are basically blur into insignificance when we zoom out to that perspective.
So going back to this whole concept of confrontation, which is the word that sticks out, you mentioned, I believe it was February 1st, 2003, right? That was and God bless all those families as well. Or was it, God bless all those families as well? Was it 03 or 04? But it was definitely February 1st, right? Of 03, right? Which is also beautiful Grayson Trinity's birthday, by the way, 17 years later. Awesome. But that moment, you had to confront a lot, right? In the middle of the training, that I could die doing this work. People died doing this work. My peers and colleagues, people that you probably knew and respect, lost their lives. So you confronting the reality that if we don't get this right and communicate, there could be an endpoint and no coming back from that. In many ways, in my life, in my line of work, especially in the hip hop and activism component of that, I've had those situations where when I was representing civil rights group in communities, we have to partner with police, and people are like, "What are you doing? This is going to be a setup. You do not need to be putting yourself in that situations." And I'll be quite frank, all those things didn't necessarily work out. Like, there wasn't a rainbow. at the end of the day, in everything that I did along those lines. But the fact that there are people like you in the world is really, really inspiring, because I mean, you made history at a time where people couldn't even understand it. And you're continuing to do that. And now we take for granted working with these different countries and international relations. But one of the things I loved about your book, you talking about the woman that got kidnapped and then returned back to the land that she did that. And your humanitarian work just put you in a whole nother realm of confronting this ignorance and confronting tribalism. So I would love if you could just give some insight in terms of the type of things that you've been involved with from a humanitarian perspective. I know it was the hope that you talked about in the book, but what else have you been doing in that lane that people need to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of development, sustainable development around the world, and I think that's really, really important.
Pardon me 1 second. Pardon me 1 second. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm gonna edit that. I'm gonna edit that out.
Okay, hold on 1 second while we're editing out. Let me go for just 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm back.
Are you good? I want you to talk about your humanitarian work. And let me just drop this in before you get into it. I was originally supposed to do this podcast in West Philadelphia at the first live TV studio, radio studio, actually, in the United States, National Historic Landmark. Because of the COVID, we had to switch, and I've been doing it at home. I just found out in the last couple of days that there was massive riots in that part of the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Don't you know, almost everything was torn up and shut down except the place that was hosting me to do this podcast. And I mention that because what that tells me, no matter what, if you do good things in a community, and if you have a reputation for creating wealth and helping marginalized people, somehow the universe, people, decisions may find itself, not always, but in this case, and I've seen this as well, shielding you from culpability and complicity and participating in that us versus me tribal ecosystem, which manifests itself in the capitalist exclusionary practices that disenfranchise people to a point where they don't feel like it's a point of even participating. So you're one of those people that you've been in all types of situations, and in your book, you talk about other people that when they went on different missions, it didn't necessarily work out right the first time, but came around the second time and they were able to have an even bigger impact. And I want you to get into a little bit about that humanitarian aspect from the work that you've done and also what you're seeking to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been involved throughout the years in various projects to do things like bring clean water to impoverished communities around the world, reduce indoor air pollution by using high efficiency cook stoves and things like that. And I think that was really important work. It was work that needed to be done, but in a lot of, in hindsight, looking back on those projects that I was involved in, they were just Band-Aids, even though they were huge projects. We did a project for 4.5 million people in Kenya, and a couple million people in Rwanda, and they were big impact projects. But they're Band-Aids, really. I mean, they're not going to move the needle in helping countries reach parity with a quality of life that everybody should be entitled to, that it is entitled to. And what I'm trying to put my focus on now is those underlying root cause problems. We've got, a lot of systems in our country and around the world that are rigged to increase the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and there's a system in place that basically consciously or unconsciously exploits the people who are having the the biggest challenges and the biggest obstacles to overcome to reach a quality of life that they should be able to have. And so the gears have shifted significantly towards those root cause problems. And I think it's really important that we continue the other efforts too. But we need to do that, the efforts like aid and sustainable development and obviously environmental stuff, all that stuff needs to be not only continued, but expanded. But that won't get us anywhere. All of that effort won't get us anywhere unless we solve the root cause problems, and we need to do that simultaneously.
So getting into those root cause problems, right? You're a social entrepreneur. As far as I know, you got like 5 different companies, right? So I can't even keep up right now in terms of all of the specific ventures that you have going on. But in terms of applying the lessons that you learned in life and leadership, what different specific ventures or are you endeavoring into 2020 and beyond?
Well, I think one of the big ones is education, and education is maybe too broad of a term. So one of the companies that I've launched is a media company. It's called Second Mission Media, and the goal of Second Mission Media is to produce content, whether that's documentaries or TV shows or films or podcasts, or that basically lead us to a new human epoch, a new human epoch where, I mean, you're a businessman, so I'll put it in business terms, where businesses are not seen as independent entities operating in a vacuum, but rather they're seen as interdependent nodes in a fabric of prosperity where everybody has the ability to live in harmony with each other and with the planet. And you know, the main thing here is that when people's basic needs are met, when they're not worried about, where the next meal is coming from or paying the rent or their mortgage payment or whatever, then they're able to contribute to society, right?
Pastor Ron.
And so we can create a society where people get to choose what contributions they're going to make to society because they've been empowered to make those contributions, and everybody benefits. So the disparity that we're seeing in the world right now is keeping not only, the poorest of the poor down, it's keeping everybody down. It's making, it's preventing us from evolving as a species.
Hey, bro, I grew up in a Pentecostal church, bro, and family. So I might, when you talk, if I feel you, I'm gonna let you know I feel you. We're not gonna sit up here and just not act like I don't feel the spirit, brother. No, I everything you said, man, is so real, and to be so transparent, brother. I know that this social impact community, investing community, ESG, investing community, I mean, they need your voice and our actionable solutions and what we're building an impact to actually make that happen. And to get a little bit more tactical and precise, could you spell out to the youth your mission, your values, and your purpose, your personal MVPs that have guided you to this point?
Yeah, I think the big 3 pillars of the message that we're trying to get across is that we have to engage in profound collaboration, long-term thinking, and we have to embrace our true interdependence. And so, profound
collaboration,
right?
Long-term thinking, and interdependence.
Embracing the true nature of the world and all its interdependent variables. So what we tend to do is, solve for things in stovepipes, right? We tend to think of things in very, very short term. The next election cycle, the next shareholder report, and you can't progress that way. I'll use the space program as an example. People often ask, why are we not on Mars by now? The reason why we're not on Mars right now is every time a new administration comes in power, they want to be the next JFK, right? They want to have this vision. So each time they come up with their own vision for what's going to happen, scrapping the last administration's vision, and they start over. But a space program is a multi-decade endeavor. So every 4 years or every 8 years, if you're completely changing the strategic plan, you're never going to get anywhere. And that's an example of why long-term thinking is so important, because things that make sense in the short term, when you look at them over decades or over generations, they might not make sense. So we need to start thinking multi-generational. The profound collaboration, one of the key aspects of profound collaboration is openness and transparency. I mean, if we're making decisions in secrecy, you know, behind closed doors, where people aren't able to see how the sausage is being made, then you're going to get vastly different decisions than if people, you know, we've got 7 point whatever billion creative problem solving minds on this planet. We need to get them all together towards solving these problems. And I think how we do that is through openness and transparency, and let everybody see the different pieces and the parts. And then the last thing is interdependence is, you know, we no longer we never are in a world, but we no longer have an excuse to think we live in a world where what happens on one side of the planet doesn't affect everything else on the planet. And you know, we, in the words of, I know that right now it's not, people are getting grief for quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, because he's being quoted out of context and he's being used to say things he didn't say, but very clearly in the Christmas sermon on peace in 1967, a year before we took the Earthrise picture, Dr. King talked about the interrelated structure of all reality. He said, we're not going to have peace on earth until we understand the basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. And he went on to say that what happens to one directly happens to all indirectly. That is the key. When I say interdependence, I'm talking about Dr. Martin Luther King's basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality, that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. What happens in Taiwan affects New Jersey. You know, everything is interconnected and interdependent. And we tend to operate as a civilization as stovepiped. You know, we think that we can operate in isolation and that we're not affecting stuff. Even when we're trying to do good, a lot of times we're trying to do good in an area and we do good in that area, but it causes harm 3 blocks over. And so we have to really think about how everything is connected and everything is interdependent. And so those are when going back to the root causes of things is you need to apply at least those 3 main pillars to progress.
Look, man, you about to transition into office like John Glenn did? What's up, man? You running for office? No, he said he's not doing it. He said he's not doing it. But look, your leadership and what you're talking about, I agree with that so much. I can remember a friend gave me the 7 highlights of highly successful people. And in Covey's work, he talked about that word interdependent. And I hadn't necessarily internalized that word until I started reading that literature, but I agree. And I think one of the challenges that I've had is creating a community of people that recognize and value ecosystem building, these big, in many ways, macro issues that require bit by bit, micro by micro step to build it up. Now, it sounds like you building your community. I mean, you went from sports, military, space, all over the world. But could you give us any wisdom in terms of how you surround yourself with the right people that have that mindset, which quite frankly is, 10,000 levels, years beyond what we're trained in. We all kind of can get trapped in that. I think Jim Collins calls it managing for the quarter, and not managing for the quarter century, and good to great. But how did you consciously, deliberately build that community, or did it just happen for you?
Yeah, I think the connections that you made between sports, military, and the space program are real. And the overarching thing for me that connects all those is a mission, right? Obviously, in a sports team, the mission is to win the game, right? In the military, the objective is obvious. It's to, in a war, it's to win the war. And in the space program, you have mission objectives that you'll have to come together. In all those cases, in all those 3 environments, what separates the winning teams and organizations from the ones that aren't successful are the individual members of those organizations' willingness to set aside their own personal comfort, their own personal objectives and goals for the overarching mission and the overarching goals. That doesn't mean that their individual desires and wants and needs are not important. That just means they need to be pursued in the context of the overarching mission, right? And so even if you want to talk about finance, there's nothing wrong with somebody wanting to acquire wealth, let's say, as long as they're acquiring it with the objective to move society forward and to do the right things with that wealth, for instance. So to answer your question, the teams that I've surrounded myself are people who have a mission mindset, people who know that what we're trying to do is more important than their individual objectives. They should be complementary, and when they are not complementary, the overarching one has to take precedence over it.
That's amazing. And you have 3 boys, right?
I do.
So do you find them absorbing this mission mentality mindset? Is that applicable to the home life as well?
Well, my sons are all out of the house, so but back when, they're all grown.
I'm a new father, so I'm asking you not only as a fan, but also as a new father.
Yeah, I think all of the things that you instill, not through your words, but more through your actions, are going to leave an imprint on your children, and are going to hopefully, that's one of the things that you hopefully give to your children is your example of how you live your life.
Man, that's real. And bringing it back to Yonkers, I believe the great Mary J. Blige, DMX, The Lock, so many great hip hop artists came out of that community. And
I went to the same high school. I went to the same high school as Mary J.
Oh yeah, you did. You already know great entrepreneurs as well come out of Yonkers. You rap, Ron? You got a couple bars for the people?
I don't. I don't rap. Although if you Google ISS Blues, it'll show how little musical talent that I have. So
yeah, I know in your book y'all was talking about being in space and like the music that you people was bringing cassette tapes or something like that, right?
Well, it was iPods. So
iPods. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go that far.
You bring up a good point because and actually I read about this in my new book, Flowing in Darkness. There were times during my space missions where I felt myself really tense, like there was a tension in me. I didn't know what it was, but I found that if music was playing in the background, that tension kind of released. And it wasn't until like maybe days ago that I figured this out. Is the reason why I was tense is because in a spacecraft, it's a very artificial environment. All you hear is the sounds of the fans and the pumps, and you're completely separated from the natural world, right? But when you hear music, it's a tie back to the natural world. It's a tie back to home, and it's a relaxation. But I think that period of tension that I experienced from being physically detached from the only world I had ever known was necessary. It served a necessary purpose because it made me a detached witness of the splendor of our planet, the splendor of our civilization, the splendor of humanity that I don't think I would have been able to see while I was in it. It was that physical detachment that I think allowed those points to be made to me.
So, floating in darkness, could you tell us what that means to you? I mean, from my raw perspective, that's definitely entrepreneurship. It's just having faith and believing that things are gonna work out, even when you're going through whatever you're going through, in much of life as well. But what does floating in darkness mean to you, and what can we expect from your new book?
Yeah, so it's a metaphor, obviously. I mean, the literal meaning is I was floating in darkness. I did 4 spacewalks out in darkness, and I talk in very visceral language about that and what that experience was like. But another metaphor for that title is Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Where the prisoners are chained inside a cave for their entire life, a dark cave. Behind them was a fire. And all they knew of the world was these shadows that were cast on the cave wall, and sounds that came from behind them would echo off the cave wall. And then one of the prisoners eventually escaped and went outside the cave and saw the real world. And he went back in and he tried to tell the people who were still in there about the real world outside, and they wouldn't believe him. And they spent a lot of effort classifying and identifying the shadows on the wall. And they knew of no other better world, and they basically didn't want to listen to the person who saw the real world. And I think for a big part of my life, I've walked around as a prisoner chained in the darkness of the cave of the darkness of my own ignorance. And I think the metaphor of the entire book is a metaphor for the evolution of society. As we go from an identity that's, my tribe to my religion to my nation, and eventually take on a planetary identity, we're going to see that we've come full circle, and that we finally have arrived home when we take on our true identity as a planetary civilization.
And when is this book coming out?
This summer, I hope, or early fall.
Well, look, you have our support. The whole Impact family is behind you. Impact the World is behind you. I guess we gotta elevate to Impact in the Cosmos when we get around you, because it's so much even bigger, bigger into any of these worlds. And look, I gotta share this. This is real and personal, but it's real. I thought that the perspective that you've been given was so necessary for me, because I'm one of those people, again, that I don't see what the world sees. And historically, great thinkers, right, whether it's in any civilization, they're killed, they're ostracized, they're ignored. But especially me kind of having certain insights and having black skin and long locks, and being young in urban communities, that level of vision, ingenuity, and insight, and even belief in myself has gotten me in a lot of trouble, right? Because people just aren't conditioned to understand it. And I mean, you came from Yonkers, so you kind of see the world, and you've been in military, been out, you've been around other cultures. But me, coming from where I came from, and then pretty rapidly overnight being in thrust in Harvard, Wall Street, Hollywood, Washington, politics, these big institutions that don't lend themselves into inclusion, has been hard, because people just aren't conditioned to see humanity, let alone ambition, packaged like this. So your old book, which I have right here, again, the orbital perspective, and I'm grateful to pass that to my daughter, that helped me confirm what I have been knowing, that we were taught a version of history, of science, of everything that is convenient to achieving he or she who wrote that narrative. And how we really need to live and move toward is a level of consciousness that's, you use the word epoch, a different paradigm, and we are the archetypes of that. And so, brother, I need you to know that your work is so needed. And given that we met at that wealth conference, people need it, man, especially that make decisions in these institutions that control capital and real resources. They need your voice. They need our voice. I'm grateful to take hands and link arm, and you got my support. I look forward to
and vice versa,
pushing your message as far as possible. And I'll be praying for you, brother. Thank you so much.
And vice versa. Thanks, Prez. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you.